there's a certain level of accountability as a ministry, as a leader, that we must uphold, or that must be upheld to the public. The moment you say that you are a standing, you are a established ministry, and you are public facing, whether that's videos, cameras, and how you market, how you put yourself on social media, you have became this particular entity that says that I want you as a public to trust us. All right. We want you to make this place your home. We want your children to establish, to grow here, to learn here, to be in your core memories for the rest of your life. We want you to, be family with us. The moment you say that is the moment that you say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge whatever has happened. I'm going to give a rapid response, and we're going to give levels of transparency throughout this journey. We're going to support you in this. And that is where the church is lacking.
Welcome to Be Real with Sarah, where the B may sting and the real never dies.
Hey guys, it is Sarah Busby, and we are back with another episode, y'all. You already know. By this time, we're in episode, I don't even know, 11, and I feel like you should know our tagline, okay? Welcome to Be Real with Sarah, where the B may sing, but the real never dies. Y'all, I'm super excited about continuing a conversation that we had maybe a couple episodes back, where we talked about, I really like when we dissect maybe a certain topic, but then we kind of go down this whole journey, faith journey. And so that's what we did a couple episodes back, but we kind of dived into the church and the experiences of pastors and the culture, all the things. And so this episode, I'm going to be speaking a little bit from my experience. So I look at it as being basically, I don't know if we want to say the trauma or the experience of being a pastor's kid, but I'm a pastor's kid. If you've been following me and watching the episodes, you know that I've talked about my father some episodes back, and I, involved you guys about him being a pastor, him being, owning a church, having a church. And so with that, I've been titled historically as, children of pastors, or like PKs, pastor kids. And with being a pastor's kid, it comes with a lot that I don't think, many pastors' kids don't really talk about, because they have to, protect their family, their legacy, their church. And of course, they can't just really have a public diary about their experiences and what they've gone through. But I've seen it both sides. I've seen it, I understand where, from the outside, attending a church, that you are, your dad is not preaching, your mom is not the first lady. And I've seen it on the side of like really walking that line, seeing my family. And so we're going to really dissect that today. There's so many conversations about the church and what the church should look like and how people should act, and leadership, and what does it mean to serve. And so if you've ever served in a ministry, or in any capacity, whether that's in children's ministry, whether that's through discipleship connections, it's really, for me, it's a form of worship. It's a form of really, putting yourself aside and saying, you know what, Lord, I'm going to use my gifts for the kingdom, and I'm going to serve you. But also, not only am I using my gifts for the kingdom, to edify the kingdom, to help minister to other people, but I'm also going to put myself in a position to be around my church community, be around my family, that you've called me to submit up under leadership. And so you begin to walk this line of just really just proximity, walking with leaders, being a leader, serving and seeing different things. But, one thing that I've just, experienced, and I gotta be honest, being a pastor's kid, I've seen it where, it's not always a pretty thing. It's not always the most glamorous thing. Seeing your parents, walk the line of having to always show up because the Lord said, I've called you to pastor. I've called you to preach. I've called you to teach. I've called you to open up this church, right? And welcome these people in, and to be a leader. And so I'm going to just it's almost like a tell-all, but also kind of give you an idea of like what does it really mean to walk the lines of ministry, like to be in a family of ministry. My mom grew up, she was raised Pentecostal, apostolic. I'm talking about old school apostolic. I'm talking about there is no makeup, couldn't wear red, couldn't do fingernails. Back in the day, you couldn't even send your kids off to military. Like it was a lot of rules. Rules that we can't say that were in the Bible, but because they were taught that way, it was like, okay, that's normal culture. And that's a lot of what we see in church culture is just like, honestly, man-made rules that you can't even really locate in the Bible. But that's a whole nother topic. And so she's, doing what she's told. That's a mindset of I'm attending church, I'm doing what was told to me to do. Not even really, and that's another thing too, is not even really studying the word for yourself, but my pastor and my leaders are telling me this is wrong. This is not the right way. And so we go into like this mindset. When you're mature, you can start to say words like, well, that was, spiritual manipulation and things like that. But of course they didn't know that, right? And then you have my father who was raised Church of God in Christ, which is another very strong infrastructure. It's a very, very, by lines and bylines, and there's certain ways that things are supposed to go. We can't verify this is all in the Bible, but this is a part of being a part of a organization, a entity, or a religion or a classification, right? And so you bring these two individuals together, and they marry, and so what the word says, when you marry, you become one. So whatever he does, she does, you're not seen as separate, you're seen as one. And so the Lord says, hey, I want you to open up a church. And mom was like, huh? But what can you do, right? You say, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna, what does this look like? And there's a saying that people say all the time about church being a business. And I'm going to touch on that because looking on the inside and really dissecting, is church supposed to be a business? Is it supposed to be seen as a business? Like, is that how it's like, is that the normality of church? But kind of hopping a little bit, when we talk about, you know, the Lord has told me to open up a church, right? He has told me to open up a church. We have to dissect, okay, is he saying open up a physical location? What exactly is he saying? Is he calling you to do something virtual? Is he calling you to start such, just a community of believers that you are going to be shepherding over? And so what we see is we see preachers, and including my own family, they go into, I'm going to get a building. I'm going to make it be what we know it to be. And I mean, early 90s, a church it was more storefront church. It wasn't virtual communities like what we have now. You can launch a church right in your home. You could have did it back then, but the normality was, I'm going to open up this building and I'm going to make things look like what is supposed to, what I know it to be, a church. And so when you start to do that, right, you start to invest, you start to buy the things, you start to, hire, you start to get the musician, you start to market, you start to, again, looking like how you're supposed to look when you say God has called you to open up a church. And so my argument, to people, not even necessarily an argument, is like, yeah, church it is seen as a business, because to really run a church, when we talk about a building of the four walls, we're talking about bills. We're talking about things have to be paid, taxes, and all I gotta purchase and things like that. And so to a certain extent, it is seen as a business. I think how we shepherd and how we lead people, you cannot go into running a church or a facility or a ministry with the mindset that I'm supposed to just give, and take from people. And that's where the mindset shifts for people. It's like, okay, are you going into ministry with the right heart? Do you have the right heart posture? Do you really love people? Do you really care for people? Because if you know anything about business, and you know anything about ministry or anything about leading, you don't see a profit, starting off. You are sowing time, tears, your own resources. You're putting all of yourself into something because the Lord told you to do that. And so again, yes, you have financial responsibility. Yes, you are required. Yes, you are told to, God has said, okay, open up this building or do all the things, and you got people to pay. So from that eyesight, it is, seen as a business from the world, but it is supposed to be on the spiritual side. Between you and God, it's supposed to be spiritual. It's supposed to be a connection. It's supposed to be, I'm obeying God. Because again, obedience, we've talked about this, y'all. Obedience is always better than sacrifice. And one thing I've learned with just being a pastor's kid is that ministry and leading a flock and leading people is not about you. It's always about other people. It's about people that you may never encounter. You may never even known that they even heard you speak or heard about your church or heard your videos. It's always about other people. The goal is always souls. But the weariness behind ministry, the weariness behind leading and always showing up is a lot, is a lot. As a child, even though my father passed at 12, there were times, me and mom, we would discuss this. As a child, I remember seeing certain things. I remember, you know, my dad being new to the area. And, when you guys, when you're new, depending on the type of area that you live in or community that you live in, small chatter starts to, roam around, and it starts to be like, oh, you heard such and such about to open up a church, and, you need to go over there. And it started to almost be, from what I experienced and what I know my family to go through, it was almost like, with him opening up this church, it was like he didn't have a winning shot in a sense. Because one thing about when you are starting something new, and this is not always the case for everybody, a lot of times you have to start things alone. You're not going to always have the support. But what's even more disheartening is when you have friends or relationships that you help build what they have, right? And then when it's your turn, you say the Lord has called you to build something, and then all of a sudden they are either nowhere to be found, or they're nowhere to, at a place to give you language for what you're about to build, to encourage or to push you, to motivate you, to help you. And so that becomes a totally different story, right? And so watching my parents, or learning about, even as a child, of how they built the ministry, how, starting this church where there was a lot of community chatter about, oh, he's now starting a church and you need to go over there and see what it's about. And I remember my parents building, nobody was coming. It was hardly that. My father had invested all of his money, all of his resources into this ministry, after helping another pastor in the area build, and his ministry, etc. And then when it came his time, it was crickets. And so I remember, this pastor coming. I remember, and I again was a child, and recollecting this with my family, like, I had to see what it was about. I had to hear what it's about. That's why I came. And so when you're building like that, when you it can be discouraging. It can be discouraging when you feel like odds are against you. It can be discouraging when you put all your resources in something, and it seems like nobody is going to show up or say, hey, you know what, Buzz is opening up a church, let's go check it out, let's go support, let's go do this, go do. And then that doesn't happen. And so that's the trauma. That's the behind the scenes that I remember seeing that with family. Now, granted, over time, when God is in a thing, He's gonna bless it. He's gonna bless it. He's gonna grow it. He's gonna pour into it, and He's gonna send souls. He's gonna send people. So we started to see the church grow. We started to see, we were bursting out of the seams. So that building was small, but we were bursting out. It was almost like, kind of one of those, at the time, one of those churches to go to. It was on a corner. It was right in the middle of a neighborhood. So it made sense. Again, it wasn't Ubers and all the things. You could literally walk to church. So it was in a really prime location in a sense. And there were other churches around. But again, something about the new churches on the block, something about the new pastors on the block. And so we started to see the ministry just increase. And I remember, my mom, because I always we joke about this, right? But there's a lot of pressure on the first lady, especially for a first lady that um that's just there to support their husband. Not necessarily, again, you're called as one in marriage, but at the same time, you still have to show up. And that's one thing that, and we're dissecting this because I don't think we realize a lot of times that some people are just called to support. You could call it being a midwife, calling to quarterback them. But God has not put the full picture out for them on what that looks like to support. And I remember some very sad days. I remember some, of course, back then they didn't use those words, depression and anxiety and all the things. But imagine having to be, I don't want to say forced in a role, but almost really pushed, made to be put into this role to show face, to encourage, to push, and all the things. But yet you're dealing with drama in the church. You're dealing with he say, she say, in the church, but you're still having to show up. You're still having to minister. And there's no rule book. There's no rule book to what this looks like. Imagine having to show up despite what is being said about you, you know, how people are talking in the community, in the neighborhoods about you and your family, and you still have to show faith. You still have to, encourage. You still have to preach. You still have to teach. You still have to show up. Yet the odds are against you. Yet your family is being, talked about, or being, rumors are circulating around. And again, this ain't even cell phone days. So imagine, information getting back to you, and it's like that's not even true. And so I remember, and I even think about today's ministry. Today, we have social media. We have ways that information is just amplified. Social media, text message, YouTube, all these different channels, digital. And you have a phone in a room, like watch out, because you don't know who's recording you. Even more dangerous times. And I think about all the ridicule that people go through, all because they are trying to do what the Lord told them to do, regardless of how it's perceived. Somebody may perceive it one way. And then we also have leaders that absolutely just do things. We're like, okay, that's just all right. I don't, that's crazy. Like you're doing it for show at this point, right? But I always have some type of, for me, I have I try to have a little empathy, and I try to have a little bit of grace, because it's not the most, to some people, the most admirable position to be in, to say, I've been called to lead. I've been called to, to shepherd this flock, to lead this church, to be the person on the front line that's having to take care of all of the things that needs to be taken care of. It's an extreme responsibility to be called with the purpose of being a pastor, being called to be, to own a church, to pastor a flock. Yet there's this, a level of accountability that us as followers, us as people, that we look up to. And so there's been this recent conversation, about, at what point do we hold leaders accountable? At what point, how should a pastor live his life? How should a minister live how should a first lady live his life? And what I love about time is that time evolves, things change. The same first ladies and the same pastors that were in 80s and 90s, those are not the same pastors and first ladies that we're seeing in 2026. We're not seeing that. Number one, we're in a whole huge digital phase, like point blank period. We're in a phase where you can build like a brand. Actually, pastors are literally encouraged to build a brand. They want to build a brand outside of being a pastor, being just preaching on Sundays, or leading, Bible studies on Wednesdays, or whatever the case may be in their ministry. They're encouraged, they're pushed. And seeing it both sides, and I call it like a little bit of trauma. I've seen it to where I it's almost as if, and it's crazy, right? To where the church is seen almost as this huge debacle of scandals, issues, problems, that people don't get along. It's always drama. It's always a mess. It's always it's like we're just plastered, like to be seen that way. Like it's almost it's a reputation of the church, and it's sad. But I can't sit here and say, the things that are said or things that, the reputation of the church is not true, because it is. Like the things that we see, when we see scandals break out, when we see the I'm about to lose my mind, I'm, this and that, like the cheating and all all the things that we know church to be. There's a positive side, right, to church. Like I am a church goer, point blank period. This is not we bashing the church, but there is a certain reputation that the church has, and it's sad, right? um but being a pastor's kid, i I see it both ways, and I've always kind of, not to say I've challenged myself, but I try to really be mellow ground, because I've seen so much. I've been a part of two major church breakups, mashups, whatever you want to call it, where it was like, what the heck is going on? I'm talking about a max exodus. People go this way, you go this way. Friendships are not the same anymore, because it's like, well, which church you going? It gets to get a little bit weird. And even recently, being a part of a ministry, um, and I remember this so vividly because within the past, let's see, this is 26. So within the past, I would say 7 years, I've attended two churches, and I was a part of this, crazy max exodus, and it was crazy, right? And so, thankfully, I could hear the Lord, and I already knew, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is what the Lord is calling me to do, and I'm going to be planted here. So I had made my decision. I was fine with that. But again, as you continue to walk in Christ, as you continue to, I always encourage people, like, you got to study the word for yourself. Whatever your pastor is saying, yes, he may be coming from the word, but there's a certain revelation that the Lord has given him. And if you will just go and divulge yourself into the word and study it, God will give you a revelation as well. So I think we put we put a lot of pressure on leaders, and a lot of pressure on pastors. And it's like, it's almost as if we just say, okay, I'm going to just, my entire heart and soul and mind, I'm going to give it to you. I'm gonna lay it at your feet. So whatever you preach on, whatever the topic is, boom, I'm gonna just lay it here. I'm gonna pick it back up after you get done, and I'm gonna move on about my business. And then when they fall, and now we gonna get to that, it's a whole big thing, right? But I remember the Lord just elevated me in my walk. I remember that. And I remember I felt like, all right, it's time for me to, maybe I've grown up, like I've matured in my walk, and maybe it's time for me to kind of move on to another ministry. So I remember going to another ministry or visiting. And one thing I know, when God is calling me, or I know God is talking, because God will keep highlighting the same thing over and over. And if that's you, and God keeps highlighting the same person, place, or thing, or you keep saying like, I need to hire this person. I need to reach out to this person. The Lord is talking to you. You just are not listening. You're not paying attention. So I remember the Lord just kept highlighting this ministry to me. And I just kept going, and I kept going, and I just kept going. And it took me months. It took me months to join. And a lot of that was because I've been so traumatized just by the church, by the people in the church, or the ministry that I served up under. Because the type of person I am, and some of you may be this type of person, is that I'm such an optimistic person, to where I want to see nothing. I look at the glass half full. And so, and I try to put my best foot forward in any relationship. I have the most hope for you. I believe that you are going to be, unless my discernment tells me otherwise, I believe you're going to be a great person. I believe you do great at what you do. It's not, I don't try to go into anything negative. But then I'm so grateful for discernment, because sometimes discernment be like, all right, now watch this person, right? And so I'm optimistic, right? I'm hopeful. And so I said, well, I'm gonna keep going, and I'm gonna keep going, and I'm gonna keep going. And again, the Lord was highlighting this ministry over and over and over. And so, I mean, it was almost like I was like a magnet, Like I just couldn't stop going to this church. I eventually go. And I knew the Lord had wanted me to join this Sunday because this was the second time I had this type of feeling because I joined the previous ministry with the same, but my heart was just beating. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and join. I joined the church, and it's one thing for believers. I think it's so important for us when we're in our walk at some point getting planted. Of course, that can take time. If you're searching for a church, you're looking for a church, and especially if you have been hurt or you have attachment issues where you're like, I'm not ready to commit yet, but I want to go. I commend you for even just saying, I'm attending church, because to me, that's still a way. It's nothing like being in the house of the Lord. It's nothing like being connected. It's nothing about being in a corporate environment, right? But it's also, I strongly believe there's a different grace and there's a different feel about being planted in a ministry where like I can call this my church home. Like I can, shout it from the rooftop, this is my church home. So eventually I joined this church, and what I noticed was there was a certain level of favor that God was sending me. What I like about ministries is that you begin to have community, you begin to, your eyes are exposed to different things, different people, different backgrounds, and the goal is always to what, come up under the kingdom. But I think in joining this ministry, I also learned. I also was educated. I also was, you know, um, trying out different ministries. I saw that different ministries were available that I had never experienced before. So, for me, I was on fire. I was like, man, I'm so connected, etc., etc. And so I started to see where different areas in me was starting to grow. So over time, I started to see just systems. It wasn't in place. It just wasn't. I started to. I think the honeymoon stage, it eventually will wear off anywhere. I don't care if in friend, you start to see, you start to learn, you start to build a relationship with this person, this organization, this company. You start to see different things, right? And that's one thing that I think when we're talking about all this negative conversation is about the church and about pastors and leadership, etc., and this and that, right? Is that as you continue to, the more involved you are, and I'm not talking about just coming on a Sunday, I'm talking about the more you serve in ministry, the more you volunteer, the more you go to events, the more you learn people, the more you learn culture, the more you learn systems. You can't help but to, right? Unless you're just the old Scrooge and old, Grinch. But if you are optimistic and you love being a part of this organization, this ministry, then you are going to learn more about it. And you're going to learn more about people, and you're going to learn about characteristics and personalities. And so that's where I believe as believers, we have got to always say prayed up, because even the word encourages boundaries. It encourages, how, and it also tells us about how we have to let down certain walls. We have to let down certain layers. We have to sometimes, when somebody offends us, because people are going to offend you, go to God about it. And also the word says, go to your brother that offended you. But in everything, we use wisdom and discernment. So as I grew in this ministry, as I gained friendships and relationships in this ministry, I remember the Lord was dealing with me in dreams. And I'm not a huge dreamer, but my dreams be so far fetched. Sometimes I'd be like, what the heck was that? And I remember um, this ministry, I got hurt in this ministry, and meaning as in physical. I was physically hurt, physically something happened, my leg, it was out, it was just a mess, it was crazy. I was like, Lord, why me? Like, I'm crying, I'm screaming and everything. But let me tell you something. After I had got hurt and I went into prayer about this, um, God revealed something systematically with this, was just how it happened. And and I was like, I was mad at God. I was like, well, God, why did you use me? And if you've ever been a person, whether it was your job or whether it was your ministry, sometimes God will, it is almost like he's using you as the what is the poster child. And it's like something happens and you may be at the center, or it may include you, or you may see it. And you're like, Lord, why did I have to see that? Like, why are you showing that to me? Why are you revealing that to me? And I always look at that as not necessarily, it could be seen as warnings, but for God to put us on guard, like to pay attention. And that's the problem of why we get so hurt and so feeling so maybe abandoned or displaced in ministry, because we are not as connected to the source as we should be. Because if we were, and we allow the Lord to really speak to us, some things will come to us by surprise, especially when it comes to leaders falling, especially when it comes to people disappointing us. And so, one thing that I learned in that was that I went through all of that. I was hurt, and I remember having a dream about this pastor. And this pastor was on the stage, and it was like he was injured. I'm gonna say that. I mean, he was injured here, and it was just like this. And I was like, man, I was like, I don't know what that's about. So that to me at the time seemed so extreme. I want to say this was about October, November. So this at this stage, the lights in the middle of this stage injured, right? I thought it was just Sarah, maybe you on too many drugs. Like, what is it? Like, we'll move on. I remember telling my mom about this dream, and she was, "Oh, that's not a good dream." I was like, "Well, I don't know what it is," and so we started to kind of dissect a little bit. Like, there's some things going on systematically, and I remember being injured at this church, and there were certain protocols that was not in place. That after this happened, protocols got into place. And if you know anything about God, one thing God will do is that God will expose anything that has not been built the way He wants it to be built, or the way He intended it, or if you built it His way, but yet you went off track. God begins to give either signs of warning, and He actually gives us the grace to correct. And so when we don't correct that, God begins to send areas of exposing. And so my issue with him was like, I didn't have to be at the center of it, but okay, I was. And so when I fast forward from October, November, I want to say that dream was in October. I find out in June of the next year what that dream was really about. It was the center of what we were to experience was this major church scandal, this major issue. And so I remember um, when it all happened and when I really found out the details, etc., my 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 first thoughts as being a pastor's kid was, here we go again. Like, why? Like, why? Like, that's the reason why people feel this way about pastors and leaders and ministry and all the things. And I was just like, but I will say, even being a part of this ministry, and this may shock some, is that I felt connected to the ministry. Now, hear this, it sounds crazy, but I did not feel connected to the pastor. And you're like, huh? Like, how does that even work? Some people, when they attend a church, they're like, oh, that's my pastor, hands down. I remember my previous churches. Oh, I rolled for them. You said the wrong thing. I'm like, oh, that's my pastor. For this one, I just didn't feel as connect. I don't know why. I can't tell you why, but the Lord had called me there. Now, granted, you're like, well, why would you attend a church and you didn't feel connected? That don't mean that his preaching wasn't on point. That don't mean that the there was ministry, there was community, there was people that I befriended that I'm still friends to this day. Like, literally, I don't see them leaving my life unless the Lord say. But there was a reason, so I'll never regret. I know that I heard the Lord say that, but when it comes to did I feel connected? Like, well, yeah, he's a pastor of the church, but there was some type of disconnection I didn't have. And I think it was for a multitude of reasons. I think it was because, in this particular leadership at the time, they wasn't as I didn't think as present with the ministry as with the congregation as I've experienced with other men. I love to see pastors and first ladies in leadership. I love to see them talk to the people. I love to see them treat their congregation like family. I love for them to shake hands, kiss babies, hug them, talk to them. I love that because that's what it's about. You would not have a full, growing, thriving church or ministry without your congregation, without those that attend, without those that serve. And so, for some people really want a close proximity, relationship with their pastor. I don't have to have my pastor's cell phone number. That's just me. But I do want to feel like I've had some conversations with you. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, like you're great, blah blah blah. Like I want to feel like that. Like I want, and I can't say that I ever had a conversation, but I can also say that the Lord said go there, and it sounds weird, right? And a lot of times we don't understand why something is until after it happens. Like you just won't know. And the Lord says to quit your job today and you struggle with it for a little while, right? And you like, well, the Lord and He's on you, and God starts to reveal things to you about this job, about people, and you start to, I don't know, you start to deal with anxiety, you start to deal with, you start to feel different things, you start to feel a change, and you eventually say you obey God, so you say, you know what, I'm gonna quit this job. I got this, I'm gonna trust you. Just say you find out 5, 6 months later, I'm glad I did. They were doing layoffs anyway. Look what happened. A lot we don't always, and I think that's where we as believers, as people, where we struggle, I know I do, is that God, you say this one thing to do, right? And He'll be like, hey, don't go to that party tonight. You're like, huh? You're like, don't go to that party tonight. And you're like, and then you find out on the news that the same area they did, some crazy stuff. And you're like, all right, you said don't go to that party today. Sometimes you don't always find the immediate answer to your resolve, right? To like, okay, well, God, why are you saying this? And so I remember when all that stuff happened, when I tell you I struggled, it was just so much stuff that happened. It's like, I think there's Netflix shows that happen about different like lifetime stories and everything. It's time for us to do a documentary of scams and what it does to people and how it can just tear up everything. It is insane. There are like, I feel like there just needs to be, I don't know, a community or group. It's so taxing on people and how things, because one thing about us as people, and I'm not talking about belief, we don't like change. It is hard for us to adapt to change. We like things, we really like to be comfortable. Like that's essentially what it is. Like if I wake up at 8 o'clock and I go to bed at 8 o'clock, I want to keep that schedule. And you throw me off my schedule, I got an attitude. Like that's how we are as children of God. Like we don't want nothing to really throw us off. We're spoiled in a sense. And it's our fault, right? Because we have the power to spoil ourselves. And so God just disrupt us. And so, but in all of that, I feel like when the conversation went around about what all was happening, what all this and that, truthfully, when we're talking about, scandals, we're talking about issues in the church, we're talking about people and things like that. I think my problem has always been around the lack of transparency and the communication and the honesty that the church has yet to provide to people. I understand as being a communications professional that there are certain things that, or even legally, that you cannot divulge to the public. But one thing that I believe that people are owed is the truth. And I believe they're owed a response. So your first act when anything happens is a response. Now, granted, church, I come from church front, what do they call it, a storefront church days, so it wasn't on that type of time. Right? The pastor was going to address whatever needed to be addressed in that pulpit on that Sunday. It wasn't no comm team, wasn't no PR, wasn't no connections team, wasn't none of that. And that's what I can appreciate about small churches, is that they're gonna usually leadership or pastor, they're gonna hit it head on. But when we talk about big churches, mega churches and stuff, they have more departments, they have more bandwidth capacities of teams. I believe in accountability. And that's you could say that's my background, my education. But in any crisis, there has to be a response. It has to be a rapid response. And it has to be a response that one acknowledges, hey, something has happened, right? Without giving too much detail because there may be legal facts. And two, there's a certain level of accountability as a ministry, as a leader, that we must uphold, or that must be upheld to the public. The moment you say that you are a established ministry, and you are public facing, whether that's videos, cameras, and how you market, how you put yourself on social media, you have became this particular entity that says that I want you as a public to trust us. All right. We want you to make this place your home. We want your children to establish, to grow here, to learn here, to be in your core memories for the rest of your life. We want you to, be family with us. The moment you say that is the moment that you say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge whatever has happened. I'm going to give a rapid response, and we're going to give levels of transparency throughout this journey. We're going to support you in this. And that is where the church is lacking. They are lacking steps and processes and protocols. And because of that, this is why we have this high pressure as it relates to ministry and to leaders, and to, the question I always ask, I had to go down this journey myself, and I always encourage people that if you are a member of a church, and I'm submitted to this particular pastor, I'm submitted to this particular leader, this ministry, you have to ask yourself, at what level are you stewarding this connection with this ministry and to this pastor? Because sometimes people, we could call it, being immature. They maybe they don't know, maybe they don't understand, or whatever the case may be. But there can be a form of putting this leader or this pastor at a certain level, that that they can't do any wrong, that they can't fall, that they can't sin. And that's the biggest mistake and misconception. That's where, even in my previous church, I was like, grace, yeah, I gotta have grace. I gotta have, because you know what? At the end of the day, just because you are called to lead me, just because you are called to pastor me, does not mean that the enemy does not fight you. Does not mean that you don't go through your own issues. I find that those that are anointed, that are called, and I even put myself in that category, that say, you know what, I'm called, I'm anointed for this. God has called me for this position. I deal with the most mental warfare ever, meaning the enemy wants to attack anything that's going to stop you from doing what the Lord has called you to do. So whether that's through whether that's through, premarital sex, whether that's, sex outside of your infidelity, whether that's lying, whether that's thief, there are different things that distract us. That's why it's so important. The word reminds us to, we should not, if, but men should always pray. We should always fast. We have to consecrate and separate ourselves. And he tells us not be of the world, right? And so, for me, as when I submit myself under leaders, there's a part of me, and a lot of this has to do with my education, as in, or my experience with working at PR and comms. It's sad and it's a struggle, but God has to deal with me and say, you know what? This person may be anointed, they may be called, but they are still human. They still have fleshly issues. They still have fleshly desire. You may can sing and get a Grammys and awards and stuff, but you may have a major gossiping issue. You may have a major temper issue, right? God may be dealing with you on different things. That does not mean that that person is not anointed. That does not mean that that person cannot perform or cannot preach or teach. But I do believe that leaders have to be held accountable for whatever actions that is not within kingdom, that's not biblical, especially if it does come to the public forefront. I do believe that there is forms of apologies, but I do believe that I think as people, we want apologies, 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 apologies. Let me tell you something. You can give me an apology all day, but until we see action, until we see changes, until we see improvement, those are just wasted words. So I think that there's a level of, as believers, we have to ask ourselves, how did we really steward our relationship and our connection with the church, with the ministry? Did we really did we just hand our heart over, hand our issues over to this pastor on Sunday, and then pick it back up and say, oh, that was a great word, I'm gonna move on by my week? Or were we really spending time with the Lord? Were we really being discipled? Were we, really being active with the Lord and stewarding our time so the Lord can reveal and show us and work with us, work within our heart? Because ain't none of us perfect. Ain't none of us perfect. But I do believe, as leaders, that you are at a certain level. You are at a different level than people that you lead. When you accept the call to preach, you accept the call to lead a ministry, That is a very heavy responsibility. You have been called to steward the hearts of these people that you are stewarding. That's why I'm gonna be honest with you. I never signed up to lead a small group because I said, oh, I can't do it. I'm not going to say that the Lord calls me in another ministry to do that. I probably will struggle a little bit, but at some point, God calls us to say, you know what? I don't want you just to sit, receive and lead, right, and be in the be in the congregation. I want you to lead a ministry. I want you to serve in a ministry because I look at all of this as forms of worship, as form of saying, Lord, I'm serving you, I'm worshiping you, I'm giving back to you. But I do believe that we can mishandle the gift. We can mishandle the call that God has given us. And I also believe that God, since God is such a gentleman, He is such a gracious God, He's such a wonderful God, and He is a father. Okay, for my parents out there, there's a certain level of grace, but also as parents, you guys know your children. You know every insecurity, every fear, every doubt, every problem area that they struggle with, and you work with them on it. You love them through it all. You love them through every flaw. But you know what? What God does is that He still uses us. He still gives us revelation. He still blesses us because you know what? What did I say at the beginning of this? Ministry is not about you, it's about other people. There's somebody else, even in the midst of you doing the things that you're not supposed to be doing, there is still something, a revelation inside of you that somebody else needs. But one thing I've experienced is that when you are not walking in obedience and you're being defiant and you're doing things that you're not supposed to do, you start to experience so much unnecessary resistance, aka warfare, that you don't have to go through. And I think us as believers and those that follow these pastors and our leaders, I think we need to do a heart check. I think I told myself the next church I join is that I said, Lord, work on my heart because I don't want to go into this based on the issues that I dealt with my parents, what I dealt with, just my family being lied on, my family being talked about, my father, his feelings being hurt, my mother's feelings being hurt, the things that she went through, the depression, the sad days, losing friends, and the things that I've seen behind the scenes of, and I never said this in the beginning, but when I said, church is a ministry, I mean, church is a business, you'll be shocked at how many families that are running ministries are so busy putting more into their ministry that they don't even have enough money to take care of their home, which essentially is not right, right? Because your home is, you got to keep your home. Like you got to take care of the kids, you got to pay the bills, you got to do the things like that. But when you're just so actively working on a ministry, preaching and going, you start to neglect things at home. You start, and it doesn't always have to be financial. It could be relationship, the connection. Like I'm not there. I'm always doing ministry. We hear that a lot. Even I remember as a child, like him preaching all the time and having to go and preach. And so the regular cadence that a family or a child needs in a thriving home was having to be split up, was having to be changed just because dad had to go preach, dad had to go travel. I didn't get to see dad as much. Mom, there was more responsibility on her to do the things. But I think again, pulling that same mindset of because I've seen so much, as for me, and maybe as for you, some of you guys know and you feel the tug that I do eventually need to be planted, or I do, or I've been church hurt. And when we say church hurt, that's a whole nother thing we gotta dissect because to me, it's people hurt, but it's also systems of the church that we experience that are not biblical and are the consequence of how of people either bleeding in leadership, bleeding in position, bleeding in different places, or they're actually not called to be in that position. So we are either dealing with the repercussions of that, and so we say, you know what, I don't even want to be associated with a church, I don't even want to be associated with them, I'm just going to go a few times, I don't want to establish myself. And that's all to do with the fear of being attached to a certain organization, to a certain community. Because if you're like me, if you have that mindset, it's because you're so optimistic and you give so much and you see the glass as being half full, you expect that same type of energy, and everybody doesn't give that energy, and so that's why we become so disappointed. So I think, you know, I tell my encouragement, and I say this from a side of, I called it at the beginning trauma of a pastor's kid. It's something I deal with. I tell the Lord, I said, Lord, deal with my heart. I want to go into this open minded. I want to go into this knowing that this is a community with people that may be hurt like me, that may have problems like me, and we're all trying to serve you. However that looks like, we don't do it right, we don't do it perfect, but I'm in a season where I need to get what's for me. I'm not here to granted, I want relationships, I want community, I would love friends, and I wanna connect with my pastor, but there is something the Lord is trying to get to me. And the moment we change our mindset to say, "Lord, help do the hard work on me." Reveal, because there's things about me that's not right. Because I have been hurt and I maybe am not as optimistic as I once were about the church, I need the Lord to deal with that. Deal with that, because the people in this new church and this new ministry, they don't deserve no attitudes and problems from me. All right. I don't need to come in like that. We should always be doing heart checks. We should always be saying, Lord, reveal things about my character, about my personality, God. Help me to change. Help me to be more Christ like. Help me to be more God like, God. Reveal. And we start to, and He will. I notice I have horrible patience. I don't, I like to get it quick, fast done. God deals with me every quarter about patience, about being still, about being quiet, about hushing, shutting up. This ain't your business. Worry about something else. Like you'll begin to see frustration, and the Holy Spirit will say, "See, that's what I'm talking about." God is trying to deal with your patience. He's trying to deal with your meekness. He's trying to deal with, God wants you to be joyful in this season. God wants you to turn, talking and gossiping and complaining to being happy, excited, encouraging. And so I think when I talk about this episode is that, yeah, I'm talking from a place of, I know systematics of the church, but also like, hey, let's do a heart check. Let's really dissect what's going on here. What are our real internal issues here? What have we dealt with in the past that is allowing us to look at this ministry, look at this leader, and say, "Oh yeah, you're not worthy of nothing. You did this. You failed here." Like, granted, they failed, they lied, they cheated, they did this, they did that. But the same God that gave me grace for the lying, cheating, and things that I've done, the same God that's gonna give this person grace. And we have to walk in that. We have to understand, because God gives seed to the sower, but anything that we sow, we will reap. We sow discord, we sow lies, we reap that. And so we have to understand there's a grace. And if God calls you to step away from this ministry, if God says, you know what, leave, don't come back, you do that. And there's no like right or wrong, because one thing about it, number one, we should always have an individual relationship. So I hope this taught you, something. I hope this kind of gave you a heart posture, a heart check as it relates to just being a pastor's kid, and the things that we've seen, and just my perspective. I think for me is that, and my final words I'll say is that I overall, when it comes to social media and it comes to marketing and media, it's such a beautiful thing for the church. It's a great thing. It's a way to testify. It's a way to minister and get to people. And it's also one of those things like, dang, it also could be a curse. It also could be a bad thing. I want our leaders, our pastors, those in ministry, I want you to do a heart check, and I want you to really ask yourself, why are you in this position? Are you in it for the right reasons? Are you in it because God called you? Are you in it because it's a trend to see preachers be called and put on flyers and to preach and to minister? Or is it because you're trying to build a brand in the faith-based community? Like, why are you doing this? Do you understand that there are hearts on the other side of the screen? There's hearts on the other side in these pews. Do you understand the responsibility and the weight? The moment you say that God has called you to preach and to minister, do you not know that is like a red flag? That's like a flag to the enemy to say, come and hit me with your best shot. Do you not understand the weight and the calling and the anointing and the oil that has to be pressed, that has to be shaken, that has to be brought forth in fruition for you to show up for these people? And for the other side, and for those that are in the congregation, do you understand that there's a certain weight, there's a certain glory that are on these individuals' lives that are called, not the ones that say that they just put themselves in that position, but the ones that are called. There is a certain level of weight and anointing that's on their lives, and there's a certain level of persecution, there's a certain level of things that they actually go through behind the scenes, depression, sadness, sickness. That we see so many leaders that say, before they preach and before they minister, they may prophesy and preach the house down. But do you not know they probably had surgery? Do you not know they probably got a diagnosis? They're going through things behind the scenes, all because they said, I'm going to follow you. We have to understand both sides of the spectrum. And it takes maturity. It takes the Lord to deal with us on this. But today, my heart check for you is to say, let me level set with myself. Let me see both sides of the spectrum and let me have grace. All right. I feel like I gave you guys a lot to work on, to dissect. But as always, y'all, I always want you to, y'all know my tagline, be real, spread the honey, and be you. Until next time, bye.